Welcome to Recap Planet. Today, I'm going to recap an American science fiction romance movie from 2015 named Passengers. At the start of the movie, the Avalon spaceship is flying through space toward the Homestead 2 planet, which is being colonized by Earth's population. The ship is on autopilot with its crew and 5,000 passengers in hibernation pods for the 120-year journey. The ship has already been traveling for 30 years when it encounters a meteor storm. In order to protect the ship, power is directed to the forward shields, but despite this precaution, the ship collides with a large meteor. The control area lights up with red alert screens, but the power quickly returns to normal. Something seems to have gone wrong. Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer, wakes up from his hibernation pod on the spaceship Avalon. He is informed by the ship's computer that they will soon arrive at Homestead 2, the colony planet they are traveling to. The computer tells him that feeling confused and weak is normal after being in hibernation. Jim's wristband is scanned, and he is directed to his cabin to rest. The next day, he wakes up and prepares to meet other passengers, but he finds himself alone in the cafeteria. He attends an orientation session about life on Homestead, but he is the only one present, and the computer instructor cannot answer his question about the absence of other passengers. After realizing that he is alone and there is no help coming for him anytime soon, Jim begins to suffer from depression and loneliness. He tries to distract himself by playing basketball and indulging in the ship's amenities, but nothing seems to lift his spirits. Jim finds the robot bartender Arthur, and starts to confide in him. The robot dispenses advice like a real bartender, and Jim asks him for a way to break into one of the passenger suites. Arthur warns him that it's not allowed, but Jim goes ahead and breaks into a higher class suite with better amenities. After a year of loneliness, Jim becomes desperate and contemplates suicide. He goes to an area where passengers can go outside in a space suit and decides to end his life by opening the airlock. However, he changes his mind and runs into the pod area where he stumbles upon Aurora's pod. After reading her passenger profile and stories, he decides to wake her up to ease his loneliness. He struggles with the decision, knowing that she will die on the ship, but he can no longer bear to be alone. He manually wakes her up and hides before she sees him. The computer program guides Aurora to her cabin to sleep. Aurora wakes up the following day and finds herself alone, so she goes to the Grand Concourse where she runs into Jim. He confides in her about his situation, admitting that he has been awake for a long time, but he doesn't disclose that he was the one who woke her up. Jim has made an agreement with the robot bartender, Arthur, to keep his secret safe from Aurora, and Arthur complies. Aurora and Jim converse every day, brainstorming potential solutions to the pod malfunction. Aurora engages in physical activity and starts writing her story. She inquires Jim why he left Earth, and he responds by saying he enjoys repairing and constructing things, as opposed to the Earth where items are often replaced instead of being fixed. He aspires to live in a house he builds himself. Aurora's initial plan was to visit the colony for a year, interview the colonists about their reasons for leaving Earth, then return to Earth. Additionally, she uses her gold-class passenger status to acquire more luxurious breakfasts than Jim's standard clearance permits. Jim and Aurora spent some time getting to know each other before Jim asked her out on a date, and she accepted. During the date, they had a meal and then Jim took her to a room containing 2 spacesuits. They both put on the suits and went outside. After they came back in, Aurora was excited, and they proceeded to Jim's cabin where they had sexual intercourse. They were both happy with the experience and established a routine that involved exercising, stargazing, and taking advantage of the entertainment and restaurant facilities on the ship. A year later, Jim plans a special surprise for Aurora's birthday and makes a ring for her. Aurora confides in Arthur that she and Jim have no secrets, and Jim agrees, not realizing that Arthur thinks he has told Aurora about waking her up. After Jim goes to the men's room, Arthur tells Aurora that Jim made a good choice in selecting her to wake up. Aurora is devastated and angry, and she demands that Jim stay away from her. One night, she enters Jim's cabin while he's sleeping and physically attacks him. As she runs away, Jim tries to explain himself over the ship's intercom, but Aurora accuses him of taking her life. As the events between Jim and Aurora unfold, the control room begins receiving alerts of system failures more frequently. Jim and Aurora have also noticed small malfunctions, such as the cleaning robots experiencing system failures. 2 years have passed since the meteor collision, and one day, Gus, the deck crew chief, wakes up early and appears on the concourse. He informs Jim and Aurora that the hibernation pods have never failed before and that something significant is wrong. They go to the command center and discover that the ship's automatic diagnostics have failed, and they need to inspect each deck manually. While Gus runs tests, a severe gravity failure occurs, and Aurora nearly drowns in the swimming pool. Gus determines that there have been cascading failures, and the ship's computer generates a timeline that shows the initial failure occurred 2 years earlier. The first few failures caused power diversions to re-equalize the load, but the load became too heavy, resulting in more failures. The entire ship is now at risk of being adrift in space, which will jeopardize the entire crew and passengers. The primary engine area was the first affected, but they will need to perform a manual inspection to determine the full extent of the damage. After Gus collapses, Jim and Aurora rush him to the infirmary, where they use the medical auto-diagnostic scanner to assess his condition. They discover that there are multiple necroses throughout his body, and his death is imminent due to a malfunctioning hibernation pod. Gus decides to put on his uniform and prepare for his impending death. He gives Jim and Aurora his wristband, enabling them to access the areas of the ship they need to repair to prevent the ship from becoming adrift in space. In the engineering section of the ship, Jim and Aurora discover a hole caused by a meteorite that penetrates through some critical areas. As they open a door, Aurora almost gets sucked out due to a hole in the hull. To prevent her from being ejected into space, Jim pushes a tablet for Aurora to block the hole while he uses a liquid sealant to further seal the damaged area. The room pressurizes, but they soon discover that the fusion engine exhaust needs to be manually vented. Despite the manual override not working, Jim has to put on a space suit and venture outside to fix the problem. In an attempt to keep the manual vent open, Jim must hold a flap, but it won't stay open without his assistance. While Aurora pleads with him over the radio, Jim is tragically pushed out, and his tether breaks, causing a hole in his suit. Saying his goodbyes, Jim appears to have lost his life, and Aurora is devastated. However, she decides to put on a spacesuit and go outside to search for Jim. She eventually finds him and manages to retrieve him by grabbing his tether. Once inside, she takes him to the infirmary, but the auto-doc declares Jim dead. Using Gus' wristband and his override code, Aurora resuscitates Jim, and he miraculously comes back to life, much to her relief and happiness. Later on, Jim discovers that he can use the command override to put Aurora back into hibernation in the infirmary, which would mean he would be alone again. He tells Aurora about this, giving her the option to return to hibernation, but she decides to stay awake with Jim and continue their life together on the ship. After 88 years, the captain and crew finally wake up and make their way to the Grand Concourse, only to discover a thriving ecosystem with lush vegetation, a towering tree, and birds soaring above. As they explore the area, they come across a cabin that could possibly be inhabited by Jim and Aurora's grandchildren. Meanwhile, Aurora's voice is heard narrating her story to the passengers, describing how they managed to create a fulfilling life despite the challenges they faced on the ship. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment and let us know which film you want us to explore next. Take care.